On a suddenly not so casual Wednesday afternoon in October, it is NBA Payday Episode 1, the pilot, October 25th, 2023. The Shark and Junior Brown. We're excited to be here and kick off a brand new season right here live on Sharky Waters Nation, X, Twitter. Coming over to YouTube, guys. We can engage you in the chat. Questions are open. It is an opportunity to dominate. Junior, what's going on, brother?
What's up, bro? I have so many things I want to say, but I'd rather just start talking about basketball because it's back. Let's get to work.
Absolutely. Not waiting around. First play, 7:30 p.m. We're going down to Miami. I'm in Central Florida. A lot going on here. Renamed the arena, the Kaseya Center, whatever that's about. But we're not worried about that. We're worried about the road team coming in here. A big spot, the first official play. Junior on Detroit at +9.5.
I like the spot for the Pistons. New coach, new identity, young players trying to prove something. Cade Cunningham, who's a star in the making, coming back. You know, he still has to show us that he can be an efficient player, but I just think the energy favors Miami. The offseason was not what Miami wanted, not getting Dame Lillard. Now, they're one of the most professional teams in the league, so there's not going to be an excuse for them to start off slow. But they're just not a regular season team. They're not built for the regular season. They just want to get in the tournament. And when I say tournament, I don't mean this new, soccer style in-season tournament. I mean the real tournament, aka the playoffs. Miami's built for the playoffs. Again, I'm not trying to say that this doesn't mean they can win this game, or doesn't mean they can't win this game. What I'm trying to say is the number is a little bit too much for me. Miami's offense +9 against pretty much anybody is something that I'm hesitant with. A team like Detroit trying to impress their new coach, guys trying to get minutes, guys trying to get established in this league. Give me the young, hungry, motivated team that has some size, can grab some boards, and stay within 9 here.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's my first official of the season. And jumping off what Junior said, one of the first things that we mentioned on the preview show is that we really like Detroit in the buy market in the futures. This team did finish with the worst record in the sport last year, 17-65, projected at 28.5. And it's precisely what Junior was saying. This roster is honestly pretty loaded with young talent and bigs. Cade Cunningham back off an injury. Jaden Ivey campaign 2. Jalen Duren still only 20 years old. Isaiah Stewart, fairly noted for renegading the court a couple of years ago. The guy's an absolute spark plug. And, of course, James Wiseman, a young journeyman, if you will. But I also like some of the other pieces they've added to the roster, Junior. Alec Burks, absolute heat check, 32-year-old off the bench. Monty Morris, another heat check off the bench. I think he might be starting back and forth, not entirely sure. And Joe Harris, obviously a three-point specialist playing for Brooklyn the last couple of years. But this is exactly where they were going with Bojan Bogdanovic the last couple of years. He is hurt tonight, but it is this model of player. They're obviously building around this young group, but to put such natural scorers of the basketball around them and on the second unit, it's going to help a lot. And, Junior, as you mentioned, Miami is not a regular season team. And I think even more specifically, they're not a regular season team off these deep playoff runs. And as you guys remember, they made the finals in the bubble against the Lakers in 2020. They went to the Eastern Conference Finals a couple years ago and did lose Game 7 at home to Boston. Of course, they went to the finals last year. So go back to those previous 2 seasons, coming back in the early season off the deep playoff runs. It was the beginning of the 2021 season. They did play at Orlando, who was not very good at the time. They were like a short 4.5. They did lose the game outright and start that season 11-17 straight up. Go back to last year, this coming off the Eastern Conference Finals loss. They did go 0-2 at home straight up to open the season. Did lose to Chicago, same division coming over here in the opener. Not exactly a rivalry type of game. 116-108, very similar number, -7.5. Did start last year 12-15. Very interesting stuff for Detroit. Detroit is 3-0 last 3 ATS in Miami. It is a 2x revenge game from last year. This is clean line functionality, shortening up. One final point before we move on. Miami opens in a bizarrely comical trap spot at home. I was saying this to Junior in our group chat last night, and I was saying you rarely find a spot like this in the opener. And I'll tell you guys what it is. They open here tonight against Detroit, the worst team in the league from last year. One home game, just one. Then they go on the road Friday night at Boston. Rematch of the playoffs last year. National game, ESPN. Huge game. Stay on the road for Minnesota and Milwaukee. You get Detroit at home for one, and then you get a 3-game trip. Ultimate trap spot, short line. We love the coaching change. Monty Williams coming in here tonight. This should be a very close game inside of 5 points. 1 unit official. Detroit plus 8.5, 9.5. Now, next play, Junior. We're talking some out-of-conference basketball here. Minnesota Timberwolves on the road, north of the border. You know this team very well, at Toronto. Toronto is being downgraded this year. Minnesota upgraded. You're officially on Minnesota at the current number, plus 1.5.
Sorry that, Sharky. I had myself on mute. I was coughing, didn't want to interrupt you. What I was saying was I know what Toronto is. I know what Minnesota is. I do not know what Toronto is. And continuity is one of my favorite words in all of sports betting. The Timberwolves are building towards something. The Raptors are pretty much hitting the reset button, right? They still have OG. They still have Siakam. Still have a couple of other guys, but those are the only 2 guys left over from that championship team. So it's a basically start over situation. One of those 2 guys might even get moved. So when you guys are going to hear me say this throughout the course of the season, and as long as you listen to me, if I've got more questions than answers, I got to look the other way. And when I look the other way, I see a young guy, Anthony Edwards, who everyone assumes is going to take a step up. I believe he's able to do that, but they just have professional basketball players with a lot of skill. A guy in Cat who's got a lot of skill. They've got the size. And again, they've got the continuity. They have a plan. They have an identity. Is it an identity that I love? That remains to be seen. I do think their coach is a good coach. I'm just not sure that Cat and Gobert belong on the same team. But again, we'll see how that works itself out. We're just talking about tonight. And tonight, I think the wrong team is favored. Shark, help me out. What am I missing that Toronto is the favorite in this spot over a team that we expect to at least compete for a playoff spot in the West versus a Toronto team who, if they get a play-in spot, would be pleasantly surprised? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's a great question, but it really goes to the continuum. You talk about continuity of rosters. One thing that I love to look at, and it is the basis for my model line functionality, is the continuum of lines matchup to matchup. And this is where them being favored at this short number, Junior, is actually not that strong. Go back to last year. They played twice. They played in Minnesota. Toronto was actually favored on the road, minus 2.5. They came home on March 18th, and they were actually favored at minus 6.5, steamed up to 9. So this is actually a significant downgrade in strength for the Toronto line, laying 6.5, 9 before, 1.5 here. This is a line functionality modeling spot towards Minnesota. As you mentioned, this roster is very, very agreeable. You know, some of the acquisitions I really like that you didn't mention, Shake Milton coming over here. The guy's just a walking heat check, somewhat fringe, first unit, second unit. Nikhil Walker-Alexander, great defensive player. Wendell Moore Jr., obviously Naz Reid signing a big contract in the offseason. Kyle Anderson, fairly noted last year for punching Rudy Gobert. We love that fire. Maybe not against
I like it.
But, yeah, I mean, it's just what you want, that competitive fire. Of course, a pop guy dating back to his years with the Spurs. And a couple other guys that I like. Jordan McLaughlin out of USC, Jaden McDaniels, length. This team has the group. Their starting group is very good. Junior, last year they moved D'Angelo Russell off the roster. You mentioned you didn't love Gobert with Towns. I agree. I had said that last year. I thought it was a bit of a clash in style for two bigs. But I do think taking D'Lo off the roster, he might have actually been the biggest kryptonite point. What do you think about that? The removal of D'Lo instead of it being necessarily Gobert and Towns.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to pile on D'Lo, but he's one of my least favorite players for the simple fact that he's talented, but his decision-making is what stops him from being a complete player. He showed you that he can be a borderline all-star when he made the all-star team as a member of the Nets. But again, just look at his shot selection. Look at his decisions in relation to time and score. He's not a winning basketball player, in my opinion. So getting him as far away from Anthony Edwards as possible was the right thing to do. The way the Lakers kind of structured his contract leads me to believe they're going to move him. So, yeah, I just don't think – again, I'm not saying you can't win with him, but if you're trying to build a winning team, he's not a guy for me who plays winning basketball. He's more of a heat check guy. When he's got it going, he's a huge plus to your team. But when he's having an average day or below, he can be a minus, and I just don't like that.
No, I totally agree, because I think that when they moved him off the roster, not only did it take away a disruption point psychologically, but it just opens up the floor for Anthony Edwards. And just finishing the conversation, this starting group with Mike Conley Jr. Mike Conley Jr. is one of the most underrated point guards in the last 25 years. The guy's a great distributor. He's a great leader, and he does manage this group very well, of course, with the two bigs and Anthony Edwards. I think they go on the road this opener and take this one in Toronto tonight. Next one, we're looking at Cleveland on the road. Going back to you, Junior, I don't love this particular game. You had made some comments that you were leaning towards Cleveland here against this new Brooklyn roster.
Yeah, so I mentioned in our preview show that I don't love Cleveland. I'm kind of down on them. But again, we're talking about the regular season. I was talking more so projecting them as what they're going to be like in their final form as a playoff team. In this specific spot, I like them. If you talk about effort, this is a team you never have to question their effort. You never have to question their intensity. They're organized. First of all, they're the best defensive team in the league. Let's just start from there. And I don't see any reason that that's going to change. I know Jared Allen is out, but this Nets team is offensively challenged. Mikal Bridges showed us a lot of potential, but he's one guy fighting a pretty tough fight. They've got someone like Evan Mobley who can match up with multiple positions, so he could give Bridges a little bit of problems. But again, I'm not even worried about Bridges. Team roster versus roster, team versus team. If I'm looking at the Cavaliers, I think their coach Bickerstaff is on, I wouldn't call it a hot seat because they believe him over there, but he's on a warm seat the way they went out in the playoffs. He really has never proven that he can be a winner, even though he's a very young coach, so obviously he needs that opportunity. I just think that he's going to have his team motivated to come out and start the season on the right foot on such a short line. I think the Cavs come in here and take care of business because, again, they showed us last season by winning 50-plus games that they're a very professional team who always comes out, gives you a proper effort. And if they lose, it ain't going to be because they didn't try hard enough. It's going to be because they were outplayed. And I don't think that the Nets have the horses to outplay these guys in this situation.
Yeah, this one for me was tough. As you mentioned, the line is a bit hard to read. It was pretty inconsistent last year. Of course, Brooklyn it seemed like they changed their roster every 2 weeks. So it was really just difficult to get a feel for Brooklyn. And I think for me, at the outset of this season, Brooklyn is one of those teams I really have no idea what to expect. Just so many moving parts. And now, of course, left with a very young roster and a Ben Simmons who is making all the right comments in the offseason about being totally rejuvenated, training, getting mental health coaching to be more centered and focused on the court. I don't really have a take on this one, but I did want to discuss that. One small point on this from a schedule spot. I do think it's a bit of a weird schedule spot for Cleveland. One road game at Brooklyn to open, and then they go home for 3 against OKC, Indy, and, of course, a revenge game from the playoffs against the Knicks. That is actually a home next Tuesday, October 31st, Halloween, and at New York on November 1st. Not a ton for me on this one, but I think you have an angle there. Next one, let's go a little bit later, Junior. We're throwing it right back to you. Sacramento Kings on the road in the opener at the Utah Jazz. Utah, of course, last year started the campaign unbelievably hot, and I think that's definitely a regressible point from an open season point here. You like the road team at -1.5.
So listen, all of these plays that I'm making, and I'm not talking to you, I'm just talking to the audience. At this early point in the season, I mean, we have no evidence to back up these projections that we're making, right? We're just basically talking off the information that we gathered from last season and the new and the roster moves coupled with motivational, motivation in based on what happened to end last year. So I'm giving you a word jambalaya just to say the first couple of games I'm betting the number more than I'm betting my confidence that Team A is better than Team B. I think that's been clear in the couple of games we've gone over, and that's the case again here. I think the better team is Sacramento. I think this line is short. I think Sacramento is definitely listening to all the chatter in the background from all these preview shows. Right, everyone seemed to come out with their preview show in the last 48 hours, and there's been one consistent theme across every show that I've seen. Sacramento's, who won the division last year, is picked to finish last in the division. They hear the noise. They know what's up. They are a clear regression candidate. We can't kid ourselves, right? They're one De'Aaron Fox injury or De'Aaron Fox, regression year away from finishing last in the division. So I expect I'm probably going to be on some De'Aaron Fox props if I'm being honest. I don't really see who over there is slowing him down. And Domantas Sabonis has got a lot to prove. In my opinion, some people might disagree. If he was even average in the playoffs, they move on to the next round. So I think he let himself down. He let his team down. And he's a hardworking player who has a lot of pride. And I expect him to bounce back as well. So I'm going off of the narrative that maybe I'm creating for myself. Because, listen, we all talk ourselves into the bets that we make. The teams that I believe have motivation to start off on the right foot on short numbers, I'm going to play that until that strategy stops working for me.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the injury report here, and it says none listed for either side. I mean, what a beautiful thing. And we're not getting load managed here from the beginning of the season in this matchup. So Junior on -1.5 Sacramento. I don't have any comments on that one. As you mentioned, short number. In my opinion, hard to read. Jazz, as we said, started last year scorching hot. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I have no idea. Staying course, my next official play at Chicago tonight. Oklahoma City Thunder buy team this campaign and buying it tonight officially at +1 unit official. I went back to last year, and of course, you guys probably remember this. Oklahoma City last year surprised a lot of people. They actually made it to the play-in tournament. They actually won a play-in game to the surprise of myself, and I'll say it again, everybody, I think. And then they did proceed to lose the second round at Minnesota. But nonetheless, this team continues to be a buy unit. Get Chet Holmgren campaign 1 here off an injury last year. I went back to last year in terms of the scheduling because I felt like I had recalled something when I looked at this game. And when I looked at the schedule, it confirmed that what I was thinking was accurate. Oklahoma City played very good ball at the Eastern Conference last year. And more importantly, they played very good ball at teams like Chicago. For whatever reason, they were poor at the worst teams. And we talk about this psychologically. I think it's pretty apparent they just didn't motivate. They did take outright losses at Detroit, Orlando, Charlotte, and Indiana. But I have this written down. Great at metropolitan areas, fringe to back-end playoff teams. Again, that's psychological. They turn up in these big town spots. It doesn't get much bigger than Chicago on opening night. Wins outright last year at the New York Knicks, at Washington, at Philadelphia, at Chicago, and at Brooklyn. And they did cover and lose outright at Boston, at Miami. So when you hear those towns, you think psychologically those are all the big marquee Eastern Conference metropolitan towns in the United States. This is where they play well. And I think a really interesting metric to analyze here in terms of the futures market, OKC and Chicago actually finished last year with the exact same record, 40-42. And books have Oklahoma City upgraded in the futures market to 44.5. And they have Chicago downgraded in the futures market to 37.5. And I think that's why they're also downgrading the line here tonight for Chicago. This is very similar to what we said about the Toronto game against Minnesota. Of course, out of conference basketball. But go back to last year in the most recent meeting. It was January 13th this year in 2023. Chicago was laying 6 points at home at the United Center to Oklahoma City. They did lose 124 to 110. Now, books are moving that line down from -6 to -1.5. That is a significant numerical adjustment. And they're telling you that what they thought Chicago was last year is not who they are this year. And OKC is significantly upgraded. This line speaks to an OKC win by 3 to 5 points outright. And I think they will get there tonight. A couple more games unofficially I want to discuss very briefly. We're not going to bog you guys down with games we don't have a lot of angles on. As Junior mentioned, early season basketball, you do want to learn a lot of these games. Junior, I'm going to throw you one. I have some comments on it. What are you thinking tonight on the Boston versus New York game?
I'm looking Boston, but, New York, again, another team with a point to prove, right? Not to say that they didn't have a successful postseason, because I think that the way that they played against Cleveland has to be admired. And they didn't even have a healthy Randall, and they still were able to pull that off. So Mitchell Robinson looked like fucking Wilt Chamberlain in that series. I mean, unfortunately, he doesn't ever seem to be able to put that together throughout a course of an entire regular season. But if you can get glimpses of that, first of all, they're a big ass team. So that alone, I think, is the reason why I'm staying away from this game, because Boston size is their problem. Yes, they have Porzingis. Unless you don't watch basketball, he doesn't play big. He is big, but he doesn't play big. And then your only other big, really, or your only other reliable big, is a 38-year-old. So I'm not saying that they don't have what it takes to get the job done. Clearly they do. But those games in MSG for Boston, now usually those games, if I'm not mistaken, are like, they play a lot of Sunday games. I feel like Boston at New York. Didn't Boston start the season against New York last year? I feel like they did, but they always play them early season, and those games in Madison Square Garden always are somehow much closer than the talent disparity would indicate. So it seems like an obvious Boston spot, but as someone who pays attention to this division a lot, because I used to live in Toronto, this is not a cakewalk for Boston usually. So I'm going to stay away from this for now. I'm going to watch and learn.
I think you make great points there. This is not necessarily just a Boston spot because Boston's supposedly a better team. I mean, the Knicks have played them very tough. I think the opener was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Boston did not open at New York last year, but a game you're mentioning, it was November 5th last year. I think it was 2 weeks into the season.
It was early. Yeah.
Boston did light them up at the Garden, 133-118, but I think –
But hold on. If I'm not mistaken, the Boston three-point shooting in that game was insane. It was insane. Sorry.
Yes.
So, yeah.
No, you're absolutely correct. They hit 27 threes in that game.
See what I'm saying? I remember that because I lost that spot. I remember that.
And that seems to be just the continuous central conversational point about Boston is that they live and die by the three. So when you bet this team, there are other teams that are in this similar conversation, but Boston is right there at the top where you bet a game with Boston, you might be on the right side, but you're going to be gambling more than you are with other teams because they're just firing off threes and there's inherent volatility. But as you said, other than that game where they did hit 27 threes in Madison Square Garden, the Knicks were 3-0 straight up in ATS against Boston in the final 3 matchups last year. 2 in Boston, both in overtime, 120-117, 131-129, and a really emphatic one at the Garden on February 27th, 109-94. And I think the interesting point there is that game was pretty much the polar opposite of the game Boston scored 133 and hit 27 threes. On that day, Boston did not hit their threes. And if I had to lean tonight, I would lean towards the Knicks in this game because I think that when you insert Kristaps Porzingis, who is an inconsistent three-point shooter, it just adds another layer of this volatility. And obviously subtracting Marcus Smart, which we did discuss in the preview show last week, this team is going to be searching for a leader and an identity in the early going. I think they might find it, but I think one of the biggest detrimental factors to looking at this team early season, they don't have a great coach. And I've talked about
Sharky.
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you, but it's relevant to something you just said. Did you hear the quote from their coach, who you just said is not that great of a coach? He said, "We have 17 captains." Yo, bro, fuck off. Okay, shut the fuck up. You don't even have fucking 10 players that are going to play. How the fuck can you have 17 captains out of? Come on, bro. Half the guys on your team are not even going to touch the court. So already you're hearing the coach just come up with fucking fluff. And what he's trying to say is, like Sharky just articulated, our leader is gone and we're searching for a new one. Fucking 17 captains. Sorry, I fucking hate that quote so much, bro. It's unreal.
I'm right there with you. I think it really speaks to a complete unbelievable disconnect in terms of the psychology of the group. And not only this group, but just group basketball. You have to have a leader. This is not lead by community. It doesn't work like that. You have to have a fire plug. You have to have somebody that's going to juice you up, somebody that the team listens to. And, we said this in the preview issue, but, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are both slightly soft-spoken type of guys. They're not the most explosive personalities. And you look at the best leaders in the sport, they're naturally explosive. You can't teach that. You can't just tell a guy to flip a switch if he doesn't have that in him genetically. And I don't think they have anybody on the entire roster that can really fire it up like that. And I think they're going to be in a tough spot here tonight. And just finishing up the comment on the game, I just think that the Knicks, more than most teams in the sport, just play the same type of game against the same opponent over and over. They don't really zigzag as much. If the Knicks play well against you, they play well against you home and road, no matter how much there's a revenge or not. And this line is fairly short. It's actually very well averaged from a line functionality perspective. The last game the Knicks did play at the TD Garden in March, Boston was laying 6.5 points. This is 3.5 here. Line functionality suggests home to road should be 3 points for neutrality and lack of transparency. This is that 3 gap. It's a toss line, but again, I think the Knicks do have their number, and I think the Knicks compete defensively against this group. Free play, I'm leaning towards the Knicks, but it's going to be a tough game to cap. But nonetheless, a good one to discuss on national TV. Maybe a slightly less interesting game, but one that I do want to briefly discuss. Atlanta Hawks here open up on the road at Charlotte tonight in the Southeast Division. This is just an interesting dynamic. Of course, Charlotte has had all sorts of moving parts. We said this in the preview issue. We don't like the coach. We think he's a stopgap. He's not going to lead them to a title, but he's not awful. Somebody had asked me to clarify what a stopgap is on Twitter the other day. But I have a couple comments on this game. Junior, you got anything on this one? Hawks at Hornets?
Yeah, I mean, is English not that person's first language? What? Who doesn't know what that means? Anyways, yeah, no, stopgap just means, like Lovie Smith. Every time Lovie Smith gets hired, Lovie Smith last year in Houston, that's literally the definition of a stopgap. But yeah, sorry, let's keep it basketball. I honestly don't even really have that much to say on this game because I'm not as high on the Hawks as everybody else. I think that their range of outcomes is probably the biggest in the Eastern Conference. If they finish as the 4 seed, I wouldn't be shocked. If they finish as the 9 seed, I wouldn't be shocked, fighting for their lives, trying to get into a play-in. So, again, sorry to be repetitive, and to anyone who's watching the show, it's a watch and learn spot. Can Okongwu take that next step? Because he showed a lot of flashes last year, and now that John Collins is in Utah, that's his spot to claim, right? Can Trae Young, rumor is he's been working on playing off the ball, because one of the laziest comparisons in all of basketball is that Trae Young is like Steph. Trae Young is nothing like Steph Curry at all, because Steph Curry is an elite off-the-ball basketball player. If you're going to guard Steph, you're in a fucking track meet going through screens, going through pin downs, trying to figure out where he is, because he's one of the best of all time at relocating and finding the open space to get his shot off. Trae Young does none of that. Trae Young is closer to what Russell Westbrook in the sense he passes the ball and he just fucking stands there and he just watches. So if Trae Young can take that next step, if DeJounte Murray can continue to be a consistent player, I don't think he's ever going to be a good shooter, but he does what he does, and he's playing the defense that Trae doesn't. The Atlanta Hawks can't be who everyone says they are. And guys, I know if you're listening to this, I'm not going to do that thing where I give you my projection for the whole season every time Sharky asks me about a game, but there's no basketball yet, right? So everything we're doing, we're playing a guessing game or an educated guessing game. So my educated guess is that Atlanta is the spot. If Atlanta is who everyone seems to think they are, they win this game by margin because there is no reason that they shouldn't win this game by margin. How many times does Atlanta walk into a game and look at the other team and say, well, we're clearly better than you? Okay, if you're clearly better than them, take care of business. This is a team on the other side with Charlotte who has all kinds of turmoil. Their young draft pick has gun charge. He's involved in some kind of murder case or something like that. Bridges is can't stay away from his baby mama. Like it's crazy out there in Charlotte. So we talk about bet on teams. There is nothing about Charlotte that says they're a bet on team. It's Atlanta or nothing. I am just not an Atlanta believer, so I'd rather watch and learn to see where I go moving forward with the Hawks.
I agree. This is a tough game. There's no way around this. And I haven't watched any other shows to see if people were giving officials on this. But if people were, we bless you with energy because we have no look on this game. This is a tough, tough game. And, the Hornets last year did beat the Hawks 3 times. And I think, as you mentioned, the turmoil.
Certainly did. They certainly did.
And it speaks exactly to what you said about Atlanta not taking the opponents seriously. And, in the previous show that we did with Noops, give a shout to our guy Alex Christensen, he had said that he likes Atlanta to win this division. And he said it was mostly centered on the fact that he really likes Quinn Snyder to come over here and hopefully bring some professionalism and consistency to the group. I think it was fairly well noted that John Collins just did not connect with Trae Young. Just did not get along with the guy, totally different energy, whatever. So you move him off the roster, you bring in Quinn Snyder, and it is obviously campaign 2 for DeJounte Murray and Trae. They did have some growing pains last year. This line is not really giving us much transparency. The entire conversation here is very much centered on who are the Hornets, I think even more so than who are the Hawks. Because I think the Hornets, as Junior mentioned, so many things going on off the field. If you go back 2 years ago, the Hornets were actually a fringe playoff team. And it's kind of mind-blowing, just the precipitous fall for this group. Like, it's just mind-blowing. But nonetheless, it's just a tough game to cap. But I did want to touch on that. I like talking divisional basketball more than out-of-division, generally speaking. You get 4 matchups a year. There's a lot more data. And when I was looking at it last night, I was actually very surprised. I had actually forgotten that Charlotte had beaten them 3 times last year. So, pretty wild stuff. Next one here. Yeah.
Sorry, if you're a Charlotte believer, just to not pile on Charlotte, LaMelo played less than half the season last year, right? So more LaMelo should equal a bit more continuity, but they're a team that's still building for the future. They are nothing close to a contender. So they're just trying to see who do we keep and what direction do we go from here. I think for LaMelo to take the next step, because I actually like LaMelo a lot as a player. It's just that his in-between game, because he's an elite three-point shooter. Look at any metric you want. LaMelo Ball's three-point shooting numbers and Dame Lillard's three-point shooting numbers are almost identical from last season. Obviously, the sample size for LaMelo is much smaller because he played like 30-something games. But if he can continue to shoot threes at that clip, if he can get his in-between game fixed, which is pretty horrendous because he's one of the worst mid-range players in the league right now, he can take that team to the next level. But until then, because I don't know if you noticed last year, Sharky, he'd get benched in crunch time a lot. That until they figure that part of the game out, your best player can't be played in crunch time. What am I betting on? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just they're a tough team to figure out. In this game, again, good luck betting this game, guys. I think the over has some merit, but even that's probably a toss at 236.5. Staying course here at the early hour. Interesting stuff here in Orlando tonight. The Magic come back here, opening the campaign off a real nice campaign last year, a season that I don't think a lot of people had foreseen going back to the beginning of last year. Facing off against the Rockets. We are on the Rockets in the over market with significance, so we like the Rockets here. I think the Rockets are a bit of a tough read in the opener. Obviously, Ime Udoka, game 1 in the Western Conference. Ime Udoka coaching Freddie VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, other guys we mentioned in the preview issue, Jeff Green, Victor Oladipo, Reggie Bullock, older guys to pair with this young core, Sengun, Jabari Smith, and Jalen Green. But I think this is potentially a Rocket spot. I think the Rockets are in just a buy element. I think the Magic have not been historically good laying points at home since they've been upgraded by books. Free play, I'd probably lean towards the Rockets. Don't love the game, though. Junior, anything on this one? I think Junior's currently on mute.
Oh, Sharky, sorry about that. Because I cough a lot. I smoke like an insane person, so I mute so that people don't hear my coughing. But what I was saying was I don't see any advantage. So what am I really playing here? So it's a stay away from me until I get more information. All of the plays that I have today are based on the number more so than and you know, Sharky and I talked about before we started doing this show. We wanted to make sure that this show is one of those shows where it's not even as much about the picks, but as more about the thought process. And my thought process here, when I look at these games, is pretty simple. We don't have enough information to be laying points with anybody. If you want to say last night you could have laid points with Denver, sure. But I thought the Lakers was actually the better spot, and I think that the referees swallowing their whistles had a lot to do with how that game ended in terms of the margin of victory. I thought LeBron actually looked pretty good yesterday for an old man. But yeah, we're just trying to give you guys an idea of why we make certain bets we make, and more importantly, why we stay away from certain games. And right now, I'm staying away from anything that's over -3. I'm taking points or I'm staying away.
I think that's a great model. I don't cap specifically like that, as people know historically, having watched stuff for the last 4 or 5 years. But I do agree early season that you are going to have a lot more value on underdogs. We saw it last year, as we mentioned, with Utah, Oklahoma City before they became the Oklahoma City we know now. They were getting points last year, early season, covering a lot of spreads. It's just going to go that direction. As I said, I lean to the Rockets, but I don't love the spot. If you go back to the last matchup last year, it was actually December 21st, 2022, so they did not play after the new year. It was early season last year. The Magic did get them 116 to 110. Obviously, the line's 4.5. Oftentimes, very loose analysis. If you see the last game was a 6-point outcome, this is -4. They're telling you it's going to be right around that same range, and it's just a tough spot. There's no way around it. Going slightly later on here, my last official play, we're on Dallas, the Mavericks at -3.5. I believe that might have caught some steam over the course of the day. I saw some 4s popping up right before we went live. But this is a very similar cap to what I was saying about other divisional games where we get 4 from last year. And the line's telling us a really good environment here. If you go back to last year, there were 4, as I mentioned. The first one last year, the Mavs did beat the Spurs in San Antonio. They did not cover the spread. It was -7.5, and they won the game by 1 point. Came back in Dallas. Books upgraded from 7.5 road to a strong -14, suggesting Dallas would get them. And they did. They blew them out 142 to 116. Then the books downgraded Dallas going on the road to -4. 14 home should be 11 road. It was 4. Dallas covered it, but they covered it in overtime. Crucial point. So books did not miss that line in the 48. And then it came back from 4 road Mavs, home 3.5, short, should have been 7. That was suggesting the Spurs would get them in the final matchup last year. The Spurs did blow them out 138-117 in one of those games where Kyrie Irving was sitting to improve their draft status, to the chagrin of the league office. But key point here, divisional line functionality, clean. Now you get Mavs 3.5 home. This should come down to a pick'em for the Spurs if the last matchup was supposed to sustain. This is actually 3.5 points strong. This is suggesting Dallas gets there by 7 or 8 points tonight. We do like the revenge element here. We also love the buy element on Dallas. We are officially on the over for Dallas in the futures market. As I mentioned last year, they did tank down the stretch significantly after the Kyrie Irving trade. Did finish out of the playoffs 38-44. If you guys remember, they went to the Western Conference Finals the previous year. So this is a beautiful, beautiful buy spot from the standpoint of you saw what they're capable of going deep, deep into playoffs, and then it all just fell apart last year. The talent's there, and they will be way more psychologically motivated coming out this season of really an incomprehensible fall from grace last year. Upgrade Dallas, line functionality, revenge game in the division, on it at 3.5, 4 now. Junior, any comments on this one?
So Sharky and I are doing a show together. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this show together is because we just love talking basketball and we love giving you perspectives. Like some of the things that Sharky just said, I didn't even know. And I told him, when we broached the subject of doing a show, like I want to do this with you just to talk basketball every day and get different perspectives. So I'm going to give you all a different perspective on this game because Sharky gave you an analytical view that I'm not going to top. We just talked about Orlando, right? And one of the reasons why I don't really know what to think about Orlando is because when you look at their two best players being Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, what I saw from Franz in the World Championships was a guy whose national team put them on his back. Obviously, Schroeder had a big part to play, but I think that Franz and we all know this as basketball fans, doing it on the international stage is a whole different animal. Even on Team USA, only certain guys can do it on the international stage. Okay, I'm going somewhere with this. I'm not going to ramble. The reason I bring that up is the range of outcomes for Orlando is so big because if Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero take a jump together, this is a clear playoff team to me. Clearly, they're making the playoffs. If one of them takes the jump, they're a play-in team. If their growth gets stagnant, then we kind of don't really know. Well, it's kind of the same thing with the Spurs. Everyone has seen what Wemby does, but we've seen what he does against inferior competition, and we don't know how that's going to translate when the games mean something. I can tell you one thing I know about Wemby. He's not a good rebounder. If Wemby averaged 10 rebounds a game, I'd be surprised. And people probably hear me say that, like, are you dumb? Like, what are you talking about? But again, it's his style of play. It's where he is on the court. It's his ability he changes the geometry of the court just by being there. So we don't even know how his teammates are going to react to him, how he's going to react to opponents. Are guys going to come at him, or are they going to go in his chest? What do Kyrie and Luka look like together? I personally just have so many questions. More questions than answers, which is why I'm not on this game personally. But I can tell you one thing: you should look to back Orlando until the market is able to adjust to who they are. Because I think the market right now is still looking at Orlando as a lesser than, and I think that they're. What's the difference between the Pacers and the Magic? To me, I mean,
more shooters for the Pacers, pretty much.
You get what I'm saying? So, and I would counter that by saying the Pacers have one All-Star and the Magic have two potential All-Stars. So, you know what I mean? And their guard play, Markelle Fultz is a lot better than people think. So again, this is not about the Magic. This is about the Spurs. But the Spurs have a generational talent on their team. You've seen how people struggle to play with LeBron because he is the epicenter of everything when he's on the court. I'm not talking about this version of LeBron. I'm talking about historical LeBron. That's going to be Wembanyama, right? Like, is Wembanyama going to take 20 shots in this game, or is he going to take 10 shots? I literally have no idea. So I look at narratives in the beginning of the season until the data can fill itself. And because anything less than a 10-game sample size, what are you even really getting from that information? That information is super skewed. Right, you're a football guy, Sharky. That's why football data is super skewed. You can look like the best defense in the league. Well, you don't play every team in the league, so it's so schedule dependent in that sport. Well, in early season basketball, it's super schedule dependent until you can get to I do it in quarters. Until you get to the first quarter, then halfway, then three quarters, you got to go with caution. You got to proceed with caution and look at every situation as, don't just go by what you already know, because your hard drive is still missing a few updates. And I say all of that to say I love Sharky's play, but I'm just not a brave enough man to bet on this game because I don't know what the Spurs are. Shark, actually, let me throw it to you. Do you think that the Spurs have a chance to make the play-in?
It's a great question. One thing I want to mention, and this is also a great point as we jump off the show, we're going to be doing a little bit more of an exploratory conversational aspect, as Junior mentioned. When I used to do shows with Jay, we would be real hot, just fast-paced, bang, bang, bang. Junior and I are going to be a lot more conversational, so please drop your comments in the chat, whatever you guys think about what we're saying. And obviously, we're going to take things slightly outside of the window of just the game we're handicapping, as Junior just discussed Orlando as an intelligent cross-referencing point to the Spurs. But Junior, here's actually a really interesting point. While you were saying that, I just looked back, and I wanted to see what happened in Tim Duncan's first career game. And this is super interesting because you don't find spots like this in sports with the same coach 27 years later here almost. That game, Tim Duncan's first career game with the Spurs, was October 31st, 1997. And the Spurs did win the game, 107-96 at the Nuggets. But I think this is where it gets interesting. If you want to talk about will they win Wembanyama's first game, theoretically the next Duncan within this franchise and league, that Spurs team that year had a starting five. And Junior, you'll like this lineup. Sean Elliott, Tim Duncan, the rookie, his first game, David Robinson, Avery Johnson, Vinny Del Negro. And if you guys remember that team, I believe they went to the finals and won the title that year. And
yeah, Steven Jackson's crazy ass was on that team.
No, he wasn't. It was Malik Rose, Herrera,
Really?
Will Perdue, Alexander Jackson, not Steven, Jay Jackson. Was that the dude?
That's Jaren Jackson Jr.'s dad.
Was that the dude from Ohio State?
No, that's Jaren Jackson Jr.'s dad.
Oh, wow, yeah. Yeah, Georgetown product. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. He's Jaren Jackson Sr.
That's actually a great trivia question, I swear.
Yeah. So I got one wrong, but I know that for sure. That's his dad.
But the only point, staying centered on tonight's game, is the team that Tim Duncan debuted with was an NBA title-winning team that year. Because if you guys remember, David Robinson got hurt the previous year, and they tanked to the lottery, and they were able to get Timmy Duncan coming out of Wake Forest. But this is the polar opposite. Wembanyama's joining a very young team, a team that does have expected northward movement. They did finish with the worst record in the Western Conference last year, tied with the Rockets, 22-60. They're graded to come up a little bit. Part of the reason why I have the Rockets in the futures market at 31.5 is because the Rockets were 22-60 coming up to 31.5, and books only had the Spurs 22-60 coming up to 27. So the point is, in terms of the cross-referencing metrics there, they're shorter on the Spurs. They're more bullish on the Rockets. And that's why I think, again, this is a Dallas spot tonight. The intrigue, really, the polarized intrigue of Duncan debuting with a title-winning team with veterans surrounding him, and Wembanyama debuting with a very young roster projected to win less than 30 games. We like it tonight. Dallas minus 3.5. A couple more games here, Junior. Let me go through it, see which one we missed here. Let's talk about this one. Pelicans at Grizzlies. A lot to discuss. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I'm actually going to keep it super short because I realize that I've been going on these tangents about projecting what people are going to be in the season. If Zion can play 70 games, these guys will be in the playoffs. If he doesn't, they're going to be running on a treadmill, running in place, going nowhere fast. So that's what I think. I'm off this game because I want to see what the Grizzlies are. I know that, historically they've been a team that's won without Ja Morant. But this is a bit different. They've known Ja's going to be out now this entire training camp, offseason, coming into the season. It's a different mindset. Who's going to step up? What is Desmond Bane going to be able to do? And again, for the Pelicans, it's pretty simple. Will he or won't he? Because if you guys have League Pass, go back and look at a healthy Zion for like 20-something games when he was playing point power forward. He was absolutely unstoppable. And if I'm not mistaken, The Pelicans had one of the best records in the league until he went down. So there's two Pelicans teams. There's the Zion team and there's the non-Zion team, because Brandon Ingram, as good as he is, he's not the force of nature that Zion is, and it doesn't translate to wins the way the best version of Zion translates to wins. So this is actually a game I'm going to be watching from beginning to end, because I want to see how I'm going to approach betting the Pelicans and the Grizzlies moving forward.
I agree with you. I think this game's really hard to read. Obviously you mentioned Zion coming back. This team was elite. They were the number one seed in the West last year through about 20, 25 games. Then they fell off the grid. I think they have huge upside. And I think that's why they're favored in this matchup. It's been a while since they've had this strong of a line in terms of the weighting. But I think Memphis is more the question mark, actually. I think we kind of know what the Pelicans are capable of with this group. Not sustainably over 82, but we've seen the pockets and the windows of it. This Memphis team without Ja Morant, we know, has been great. ATS.
And Steven Adams.
True. Great point. They've been great without Ja Morant, going back to the previous window, obviously with Dylan Brooks. Take Dylan Brooks off the roster, insert Marcus Smart. As you mentioned, Steven Adams, season-ending surgery out of nowhere a couple days ago. This is just a tough game to read. There's just not a lot of angles on this. I saw some people playing this game, and again, we'll give you good energy, but I just don't think there's a lot of access here conversationally. My guy in the chat, Juiced Haas, what's up, brother? Any thoughts on Pacers -5 against the Wizards?
Oh my God!
Junior, talk to him. Talk to him.
I mean, listen. So here's the thing: the Wizards are the worst team in the NBA until proven otherwise. The Wizards are a team where if you had to have a vote of what team has the most guys that I would hate to play with, it's got to be the Wizards, because I'm not trying to disrespect Jordan Poole, but he just doesn't seem like a guy that you want to play with at this stage in his career, because he has something to prove, and he's a shoot first, second, third guy, right? So, and he's a bit of a turnover machine, but that's fine. We'll see how that plays out. I actually like Kyle Kuzma. I think Kyle Kuzma played really well last season, but Kyle Kuzma, and this is maybe Shark, correct me if I'm wrong, I could be projecting. Kyle Kuzma was a Laker. He was competing for titles. He even had the goofy ass pose where he posed with the championship, as a tribute to Kobe. Well, to go from that to what he is now, I don't think that sits well with him. And I think that he's going to be auditioning for his next job, which is not conducive to team basketball. He's going to be doing him. I don't think he's going to be doing what's best for the Wizards. So it's two guys, your two best guys, that are me first guys. Yikes. The Pacers, on the other hand, in my opinion, are going to surpass expectations. I think Rick Carlisle is easily one of the 5 best coaches in the NBA, and he's just a bit lost in the shuffle because he's in Indiana. He will have them prepared. They have one of the best playmakers in the league, and I look at playmakers in the same way as I look at quarterbacks. Yeah, a playmaker might not be the most important player on your team the way a quarterback is, but if you have a playmaker on your team, guess what? Look up and down NBA rosters. More teams don't have playmakers than do have playmakers. So a facilitator like Halliburton against an undisciplined team like the Wizards, it's Pacers or nothing for me in this spot.
I would agree. I mean, we don't like the Wizards at all, and we like the Indiana Pacers. We are on them in the over market at 38.5, coming up from last year's final result. We discussed this before, but I think it's worth noting. If you guys remember, Junior, obviously you just said this about New Orleans. Indiana started last year very well too. They were, I believe, 5 games over 500 through the first 41, proceeded to cliff dive, some injuries, Halliburton, a brutal travel schedule, a lot of opponents that were slightly better than them. They had a little softer early season. The one thing that's really confusing to me on this particular game, this is getting steamed aggressively towards the Wizards. This opened at 7.5, I believe, and it's down to 4.5 now. I mean, this is just a general comment, not so much how I handicap or Junior handicaps, but there are certain syndicates that do just bet numbers for supposed value on the underdog type of stuff, which I don't particularly agree with. Indiana last year was not great laying heavy numbers at home to uninspiring opponents. They did have some very notable tanks. I remember they tanked to Brooklyn when Brooklyn was playing their backup group, and I believe they might have lost the game outright. You know, the thing with Indiana, they are a bye team. They're still a young group, and when they're laying a big number, it's hard for young teams to cover big numbers because they're largely dependent on the three ball, first of all. There's going to be volatility with the three ball. And they also just don't have a ton of veteran leadership and maturity where they just are going to really put down the pedal for 4 quarters and hammer a team. And I do think there's a bit of a look-ahead element here. I talked about it with the Miami situation starting against Detroit before they go on the road to Boston on Friday. This is not as overwhelming of a spot as that one, but this is an opener against projected to be one of the worst teams in the sport at home. They do play their next game on Saturday night in the division at Cleveland. Then they play a divisional home game against the Bulls. Then they play a road game at the Celtics, home in the division against the Cavs. So if you really look at this from a schedule dynamic position, one random game against the Wizards, then you get division Cavs, division Bulls, championship quality Celtics, and division Cavs again. I think that's part of the reason why this is getting steamed towards the Wizards tonight. I think people are probably considering this as a look ahead or a bit of a lackluster spot for Indiana tonight. It was 82 games. You saw it last night. As you mentioned, people thought the Lakers were going to cover. They kind of coasted the game. AD 0 points in the second half. The Dubs looked like they were in shambles. This is just where sometimes, as Junior mentioned, you want to be taking these underdogs in the preseason, particularly when these games are being played in ambiguous, out-of-division, uninspiring spots. I still don't really know why the line moved 3 points without significant injury unless I'm missing something, but it should be noteworthy. Somebody out there with a lot of money is pounding the worst team in the sport. So take that for what it is. Speaking of the worst team in the sport, last game on the slate, 10:30 p.m. out west, Crypto.com. LA Clippers laying 8.5, 9.5, going back and forth against the Blazers. Blazers, obviously, a totally new group, very young roster. Scoot Henderson in here. Clippers last year were not very good early season laying big numbers. I'll throw it to you, Junior, for some comments, and then I have a couple comments to close this one.
Yeah, I mean, the Blazers are in a situation that's the closest thing to an NFL team that just basically tanks, like the tank for Caleb situation that's going to start happening in the NFL in the next month. The Blazers don't have anything to build on. What they have are pieces, and all of those pieces are auditioning for jobs. Obviously, you have DeAndre Ayton, who believes he's going to do something, but he's going to be very similar to what Kevin Love was in Minnesota. Not numbers-wise, but just good numbers, bad team, which it just doesn't mean anything. He's just going to put up empty numbers. So if you want to pick him in fantasy for those purposes, okay. In terms of this game, it can only be fading Portland. But again, they're still professional basketball players. And here's the thing. Their new guy, Scoot, is another one of these guys, and maybe I overvalue this. He's an effort guy. Scoot is going 110 miles an hour and 110%, and he ain't going to stop unless he breaks. So if he can inject that culture into his teammates, because no matter what, whether his teammates want to like it or not, because, they're all kind of young guys, so they might be looking at Scoot sideways like, yeah, Scoot, like if you're Shadon Sharp, or Shadon Sharp might be looking at Scoot like, yo, Scoot, I'm already here. I already got games under my belt. I'm about to show y'all what I can do. So, in that sense, I think that you can't just automatically fade them at any number. They're going to give you effort, right? Because, again, these are guys auditioning. These are guys who are trying to make their way. They're trying to get paid, bro. They're trying to get contracts. So I'm not going to blindly fade Portland, but they're clearly the worst team in the whole entire NBA, who has no identity, not even really sure that they have a competent coach. As much as I used to love Big Shot Chauncey as a player, I have no evidence that Chauncey Billups is a good coach, and that he can develop young talent. So this is a complete wait-and-see team. We have no idea what they're going to be until right around playoff time, which is when they'll be packing their bags to go home.
No, I agree with you. And we had said this on the previous show. We thought Chauncey Billups was probably an okay solution for the Lillard group trying to compete for the playoffs. He's clearly the wrong coach for this group. He doesn't have the patience for it. He has to be coaching older guys. I think he'll be gone within one season for sure. Maybe even this season. I think maybe he probably won't resign because that's not what happens, but I think he's on his way out the door. But one of the reasons, and I think probably the only reason I think this might be a fade spot of the Clippers tonight, if you go back to last year to start the season, the Clippers purely did not play well as a significant favorite. If you go through their home calendar early last year, actually home and road, October 25th last year, it was a year ago today, they did play a road game at Oklahoma City as a significant favorite. They got hammered 108-94.
Hey, Sharky, I lost you. Can you hear me still?
Yeah. You in there?
Yeah. I'm going to switch over my feed because I can't hear you for whatever reason. So keep going, and I'll rejoin you in a second.
Okay. So, yeah, a year ago today, as a significant road favorite, 108-94 loss at Oklahoma City. And I think, again, speaking to the lack of motivation for this team early season, they did play back-to-back games at Oklahoma City last year. I think a lot of people had taken the Clippers to revenge them. They did not. They lost again 2 days later at Oklahoma City, 118-110. Then they came home off two losses and got obliterated by New Orleans on a Sunday afternoon, 112-91. Junior in there. And continuing on this, Houston, then they played Houston at home after that. Did not cover that, 95-93. Went to Houston, another lackluster one, 109-101. Their first cover, really, of that entire window was November 4th last year at the Spurs. I remember that. We actually had that correctly. We had a handle on the Clippers early last year. We actually had them. We faded them correctly against New Orleans on that Sunday, and we bought them at San Antonio, 113-106. Moral of the story here, without going into immense detail, they were not good at all as a favorite last year, early season ATS. So I think that ultimately tonight, if you want to play late night, 10:30 p.m. here Eastern, 7:30 Pacific, this is probably an underdog spot. So that's all we got on that one. And it looks like Junior's coming back in here on another device.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
The echo is insane, but yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. And just wrapping it up, even after their cover at San Antonio last year, they came home on Sunday 11-6, and they lost to Utah by 8 points, 110-102. So last year, early season, the Clippers started 0-4 ATS. They got blown out by Phoenix. They got blown out by New Orleans. They played a horrible ball and beat Houston by 2 points, and they lost by 8, but as a significant favorite to Utah. So it's only the road dog in this game, and that's all I got on that. Anyway, Junior, any more comments?
No, I'm just, it's funny, bro. So yesterday I was watching the first game. I fell asleep during the Golden State game. Woke up this morning, and I couldn't be happier that I could just wake up and just turn on some NBA at 5:15 in the morning and get caught up. So insomnia season is back. I got a lot of games to watch tonight and tomorrow morning, and I couldn't be happier. I'm especially happy to be here talking basketball with y'all, with my guy Shark. But listen, Shark mentioned this is your guys' show too. We need those comments. We need your picks. We need your leans so we can discuss. This is a community where we're not just here giving out picks. The amount of fake cappers online now is disgusting. It's an epidemic. We're just here to talk basketball to help you all cash checks. That's it. That's all.
No doubt. First episode of the year. A beautiful Wednesday afternoon it is. NBA payday. Sharky Waters Nation. 9 words of lifestyle. Ride the way we out of the water. The Shark and Junior Brown wrapping it up. Junior with 3 plays. Detroit plus 9.5. Minnesota plus 1.5. Sacramento minus 1.5. 4 top plays for me. Detroit plus 8.5. Minnesota on the money line. Oklahoma City plus 1. And Dallas minus 3.5. Closing it out. We will be on here tomorrow. We'll be on the BetUS TV show tomorrow as well. And Friday. Saturday, we're figuring out what we're doing. Sunday, we're off. Sending you guys all the best vibes. Wednesdays are for winning. 12 games on the card today. dominate at the highest order. Junior, I appreciate you. Signing out. It is the Shark. It is Junior. It is NBA payday. Let's get paid.